Greetings fellow Nikon shooters. There have just been some major firmware updates announced for the Z9, the Z6 II and the Z7 II. Today I'm going to talk you through all of them. The updates are actually coming out in about a week. If you've already grabbed my guide to the Nikon Z mirrorless system, it's a comprehensive setup guide to how to get the most out of your equipment. I will be going through and showing you the amazing new updates that the Z9 firmware version 2 is bringing and how to make the most of it. I'm going to go through all of it. I think the flagship or the top line announcement on this is the introduction of 8K 60p video for the Z9, but there's actually so much other stuff tucked away in this update, as well as for photography updates. So I'll focus on the Z9 first, then we'll get into the other two cameras. So Z9, you know, sold out all around the world. If you're wanting one but haven't put in an order because of the waiting list, I would suggest you get on the waiting list. People are starting to get deliveries more and more. I'm hearing from people, yay, I just got mine, I ordered in January, whatever. Get out there, it is an amazing camera. We actually use two of them in studio. I'm filming on one now in 8K 30. And this, however, is the one that we have rigged up in a cage and everything ready for a shoulder mount. For our main filming camera, I have this crazy probe lens on from NRAW because I've been doing some macro stuff with watches today. Now, if you haven't already, folks, please do subscribe to the channel. It really does help with our overall growth. And if you head on over to mattgranger.com, you can sign up to the mailing list there, get updates on what's going on, and I'll send you out a free copy of my guide to improving your portraiture. So let's just jump in. The firmware version 2, it's coming to be released on April 20th in terms of video. So as I said, 8K 60 is coming. They're also bringing 12-bit RAW video in camera. So we're talking, it's ProRes, 12-bit ProRes RAW HQ or their new NRAW straight to the Z9 memory cards without having to use an external recorder. This is pretty fantastic. There's not many cameras out there, especially at this price point, that do it. And it's going to create a small full HD companion file, so you can check that if you're working in the field and you want to check the rushes, which basically means at the end of the day quickly, or at the end of the shot, quickly check the files to make sure you got everything you needed. That can be easier to do on full HD, depending on the monitors and equipment you're using in the field. In terms of NRAW, they're saying half the file size, all the flexibility. So it's going to have the same amount of depth and detail of a 12-bit RAW video in a file that's half the size of the equivalent from ProRes HQ files. We'll have to see that to test it, but that sounds really promising. I can tell you, as someone who has about 4 terabytes of compact flash cards within sight of me right now, sorry, CF Express Type B cards, memory is the eternal challenge when you're filming in 8K or 4K 120. So they're saying that NRAW is going to be available for every Z9 resolution and frame rate. That's huge because I really didn't think that that was going to be the case. When they said 8K 60p is coming, I thought it's going to have caveats like a really short recording time or only in the lowest compression format, but they're saying including, it's actually 8.3K at 60p and 4.1K at 120p, all will be available in camera with NRAW. The 8.3K footage, obviously, like I'm doing now, gives you the opportunity to have multiple crops on your frame, although I'm outputting this still as a super high-res file, so I'm not going to crop it too far. Firmware 2.0 also gives you the ability to record 12-bit 4.1K ProRes RAW HQ at 60p in camera. So if you're a videographer, this stuff can really matter. If you're a photographer, stay tuned because there's great updates for you guys too. Something I'm really excited about, they're giving new displays for the videographer side of things. There's no doubt a lot of serious video people are going to the Z9. For the features that it's offering, there's really nothing in the market sub $10,000 that can do what it can do without overheating and with having a fantastic battery life. And now with 8K 60 or 8.3K 60, there's really very little I can think of in even higher price points that can hold a candle to what these are going to be capable of. So we're talking in terms of new display, a new waveform display, a red recording border on the shot to let you know you're recording, not just the little dot in the top corner, and a dedicated video info display panel, which is really handy to have all of that info. Also, 1/6 of a stop fine adjustment to your ISO to get the exposure where you want it, rather than a third. That's great. So you've got 640, 720, 800, 900, 1000, 1100, lots more options, twice the fine tuning that you can do there. Some things we're going to have to see once we get in the hand, but they're saying extended oversampling options to enhance sharpness and definition with 4K 60, better exposure on faces with improved auto exposure, tracking them and making more subtle refinements to the exposure, different focus speeds when you're in video, which is handy. You don't want it jumping too fast sometimes, and the ability to quickly export a bunch of stills from a video file in camera as just an option rather than having to go and do that in post. I'm someone who loves to be in the field shooting. If there's more that I can do in camera, even if it's pulling out sample files, is great, rather than having to do that in studio behind a computer. That's great. Now, in terms of photography, we are getting pre-release capture, which when you're shooting in 30 or 120 frames per second still, gives you the ability to actually, I think it's like live mode on the iPhone, when you hit the photo, it's actually taken a bit before that and a bit after. So saying up to 120 pre-release shots, so I'm assuming that means 1 second. So if you're in 120 frames, you get 120. If you're in 30, you get 30. But so as you're framing up and everything, when you hit the button, it will have actually started storing a second before that and save it for you. So if you're trying to time something really precise, like a dancer kicking in the air or somebody kicking a football, and you hit the button just as they've made contact, but you wanted the shots before that, a 1 second insurance policy of a buffer could really help some people out. Something really cool is a bunch of new, 20 to be precise, custom wide area AF modes. So at the moment you've got 2 different options. They're basically both just a rectangular box and you can move that around. Now you can make them all different shapes and sizes to really have it be where you want it to be. Not always having a standard shaped rectangle is going to do it for you. The example they give here of people like jumping over hurdles is a great example. You want it to stay on the face. You want it to get the width of the frame rather than just a smaller area. That's a great way. And if you're not clear on that, why using that kind of an AF mode is great is you're basically letting the camera only scan that area. It's going to be faster and more efficient than if it's scanning the entire frame. It could be thrown off, or if someone fell in the background, it might jump to an eye that's lower in the frame. This way you're able to keep the focus just where you want it to be. It's great for birds, it's great for sport, and it's also great in busy scenes if you're like shooting a person on the street and you don't want it picking up all the faces in the background. Another very cool one, they're bringing the ability to set focus positions on any Nikkor Z lens. So not just the ones that were advertised as having that when you got it. So you'll be able to program in the focus position, save it, and then toggle easily between them. So again, that's great if you're shooting sports, say you're shooting cricket and you want to have both ends of the pitch, or baseball and you want to have the different diamonds, the different bases covered, to be able to dial those in and just hit the button and know it's going to go to second base focus for you rather than having to find good contrast and grab it is really nice. Another thing, it's giving smoother viewfinder performance with 120 frames per second refresh rate. So it's unlocking the fastest refresh rate that they have offered. Great for, again, birds, sports, and all of that. Something that I'm sure some people will enjoy. I see often in the photo competitions that I run that people submit these shots to be able to blend motion into a single image. The example they show here is a person doing a long jump, but also people do it with like planes flying through the sky, or all kinds of movement, or someone doing a jump on a ski rail, that kind of thing, or a skateboard trick. To be able to have it join together a bunch of different files to make a single frame in camera. Again, really handy if you don't need to spend time at your computer to do that. New updates for those guys who like to do long exposure, the ability to dim the viewfinder, so then not introducing ambient light into your shot, but also what they're calling long exposure display that includes a live counter to your exposure time. So I would love to see that be like, I think what Panasonic has, that shows you the exposure building over time. That would be really neat. That's handy when you're doing a bulb shot, for example, to know when you've got enough and it's time to stop the exposure. There's 6 more points that they say are photography upgrades that are a little bit vague. I'll just read them out to you here. Confirmation that you're capturing images in silent mode with a new visual indicator. There are already visual indicators. I don't know what the new one's going to be. There's options to have bars on the side, bars on all the sides, or even a blackout. So I don't know that that should be a problem for people, but there's going to be a new option. Find the right image faster by setting the main or sub command dial to jump to the first shot of every burst of a sequence. That's quite handy. So if you shot 300 shots of a bird and then you stopped and then you took another 50 shots of a bird, you can just jump to the start of each burst. Move between focus points with a new speed selection tool, so that could be handy if you really want to rapidly move through the points. Improved auto white balance for rapidly changing scenes like sports. I have to see how that performs, but if it works, that's great. More easily toggle between camera settings like subject detect on and off with recall shooting functions hold option. That's great, but there are already so many things you can do with custom settings and menu banks on the Z9 that I go through in detail in my express setup guide. So again, maybe more options better, but if you know how to set this camera up, it already has so much of that stuff there, just maybe not quite as at your fingertips. Improved manual white balance. Oh wow, that lets you target an area as small as 0.5% of the full frame. That would be handy to be able to just really pinprick the area of the frame that you want to take the white balance from. Very cool. So some big updates coming for the Z9 in a little under a week. As I said, I will update the guide once I've been able to update it. Now, they have also updated the firmware for the Z6 and Z7 Mark IIs only. It's going to be firmware version 1.4. Let me just read it off here. Enhanced autofocus stability, preventing the focus point from unintentionally moving to the background. That could be handy. I have heard people finding that to be an issue. I rarely find it, but if it's way out of focus on the background, then sometimes it doesn't find your subject, but I don't really find it jumping off. It's just that it may have difficulty to initiate the focus. Also allowing the ability to emulate linear focus with selected lenses while manually focusing. Well, that's handy. So that basically means as you're turning, it's moving in a more linear, smooth way through the range. When you're, for example, on a lens like this, that is a 2x macro probe lens, going from there to there is a huge adjustment in actually the practical focus that you're getting. You have to make like 1/4 millimeter adjustments, although this is a specialized lens, but that's still handy if you're doing manual focus pulls. Finally, 1.4 is adding support for a new MLL7 remote control, so not much of a big deal. But Z9, huge updates coming in there. Z6 and Z7, good to see that they're still being updated. Have to see how they perform in the real world. I'll pop links to my Nikon setup guide in the description below, as well as to my rig and what we're using here if you're interested in that for video, and this crazy lens if you've never seen one before. Let me know any questions that you have, and do remember, sign up to the mailing list to get that free guide to improving your portraiture. See you guys.